Housework is women's business. How shameful to ask your husband, says the husband with a smug face, ordering his wife to do the housework even though she has a broken bone. I think it's the husband who should be ashamed. Is divorce the only option here? That's what I thought, and then our quiet, book-loving daughter dropped a bombshell. We have another child in this house, right? I wonder if it's my little brother? My name is Kay. I'm a fearless 65-year-old who grew up in rural Wyoming, not afraid of frogs or worms. On the other hand, my daughter, who was supposed to grow up in the same rural Wyoming, grew up to be a fragile baby who is even afraid of ants. I wonder if the difference is whether she played in the dirt when she was young or not. There was a time when I regretted a little that I grew up in Wyoming. It was the story of my dark married life. Back in my 20s, my boss at work suggested that I meet a man. It wasn't exactly a formal matchmaking process, but the man was a business client who was about 3 years my senior. That man later became my husband. It may surprise some that I was introduced to someone by a coworker, but in the countryside, it's not uncommon. I don't know what it's like in the city. I've never lived in one. But in my region, even the professors from the university would recommend blind dates to single women. It was a strange tradition. Being older, my husband was knowledgeable about things I didn't know, and his stories were always interesting. He was deeply trusted by his superiors, incredibly gentle, and was an impeccable man who was attentive to the delicate aspects of a woman. Seeing him, a man who seemed to know everything, through slightly starstruck eyes, I believe it was only natural that I ended up marrying him. But now I think, I wish someone had slapped me on the cheek at the same speed as a fastball from a top baseball player, and told me not to marry to him. Our dating period was half a year. We didn't live together before getting married, we quickly got married, and before I knew it, we had a child. Because our dating period was short, it was fun to learn about him in ways I hadn't known before. But when our child turned 2, I started to see things about him that I would have been better off not knowing. Until then, he was reliable, listening to my stories and occasionally giving me advice. Today my boss was bragging and didn't even realize that I'm the one supporting him. It's really frustrating. Despite the fact that I'm the one supporting him, he acts so important. Yes, you have it tough too. There's always something at work. Me too. I don't need to hear your story. Huh? Well, my husband started cutting me off when I started talking. He just wants to talk about himself and wants me to listen to his stories only. It's as if he thinks of me as a trash can for his complaints. He does occasionally listen to my stories, but as soon as the conversation starts to get a bit exciting, he cuts me off with, that's enough. It's too long. Get me a beer. Even when it comes to our child, he was the same and I couldn't consult him about parenting. Looking back, our dates were always without alcohol. Because he used to drive me home. Is it because he got used to me as a wife and got into a routine? Or is it that his true nature comes out when he gets drunk? No, it could be both. He would have been a great husband if it weren't for the drinking. Every time he interrupted our conversations, I would think, here we go again, but decided to just let it slide, assuming he was tired from work. Then one day, we were invited to the wedding of one of his colleagues. This was a young man we had invited to our own wedding, who had even provided some entertainment during the reception, and now he wanted us to attend his wedding as a couple. Believing it to be the polite thing to do, we naturally attended the event. Spotting a junior colleague at the venue, my husband cheerfully exclaimed, "Hey, congratulations on the wedding." He put his arm around the groom, dressed in his tuxedo, and delivered his warm wishes. I also gave my congratulations and smiled. As my husband and the groom were chatting happily, I heard some troubling words. Listen, once you're married, make sure you train your wife properly. That's what really matters after marriage. Make sure she knows that she owes her life to you. The groom was listening with sparkling eyes, obediently saying, yes. But I was mortified to be there. Educate your wife? What on earth were these men talking about? Shouldn't they be the ones receiving an education about basic human rights? Naturally, with the festive mood, I couldn't confront my husband and say, "What are you talking about?" Especially considering that my husband was the groom's boss. So I postponed my lecture for when we got home. Once the ceremony was over, and we returned home, my husband started drinking and I broached the topic. You know, you really shouldn't talk about educating your wife. Maybe men feel that way, but women just find it unpleasant. I tried to be as polite as possible, considering his mood, as he was happily drinking. However, he retorted, What? You think that way too? Huh? I thought you were different because you do the housework and keep the house clean without me saying anything. I didn't know you were one of those women who don't appreciate their husbands. I was stunned at my husband's words. Sure, I had been playing the role of a wife, imitating what I saw my mother do when I was little. Whenever my husband's drink was empty, I would casually bring him a refill, and I took care of the cleaning, laundry, and other chores. I didn't mind doing it and had taken the initiative without giving it much thought, but I realized then that my husband took it for granted that it was a wife's job to do these things. I am grateful, you know, I'm a homemaker and I live off your salary. But I don't think it's right to say things like that to others. Every family has a different atmosphere. Quiet! My husband, who inexplicably lost his temper at my comment, immediately slammed the table. It's only natural for a wife to obey her husband once they're married. That's what it means to be a real man. I let you off because it's me, but normally, you'd be slapped for arguing with your husband. At the change in his tone from babe to you, I felt like I was seeing my husband's true nature. I was silent, stunned, and my husband said, I didn't think you were such a naive woman, dramatically pouring the rest of his beer down the sink, crushing the can roughly, and stomping up to our second-floor bedroom. His actions seemed to say, I'm angry, be afraid. Listen to what I say. Needless to say, I was immediately turned off by my husband, who thought winning was getting angry and couldn't control his emotions. The next morning, my husband woke up and, as if nothing had happened the day before, said to me, my tie, instructing me to bring his change of clothes. Normally, I would have followed his instructions without thinking, but that day I found myself thinking, why do I have to do this? Thinking back, my father, to borrow my husband's words, was a real man too. My mother always looked after him, and I grew up thinking that was what marriage was supposed to be. But now I wonder if my father was the same way, a domineering husband. Back then, without the internet, it was hard to know what a domineering husband was. I could only get an idea from a story about a domineering man, but the man in that story seemed much more loving than my husband. At least in the story world, there was no terrifying sound to scare the other person. Despite my husband's nonchalant attitude in the morning, there have been changes since that day. For example, my makeup. When I tried a slightly brighter pink eyeshadow for the spring, he shouted at me, a married woman shouldn't use a color that attracts men. Turning the situation around, I could have retorted, would you be charmed by a woman in full pink, like a Barbie, but responding would have been bothersome, so I kept quiet. Moreover, when I tried to style my hair a bit according to the latest fashion trends, he'd yell, at your age, don't dress so horribly. Do you want to embarrass me? After he comes home, his commands like dinner, and hey, where's my water, have been treated as normal due to the environment I grew up in. However, even my own father never made remarks about his wife's appearance like my husband does. Ever since I began to object, my husband started to enforce his idea of what a woman should be. I love my parents, but I think if I'd been raised in a more egalitarian household, I would have realized my husband's abnormal behavior sooner. Reflecting upon it, there were many instances that come to mind. From then on, I gradually started to feel sickened by my husband, but I had a 4-year-old daughter at the time. She was already attending kindergarten, and if we divorced, I was worried about having to move her to another school and whether I, as a stay-at-home mother, could make ends meet. These are tough times for single parents. The rate of finding part-time work or employment significantly decreases just by being a single mother. I decided to keep living with my husband and save up money by working part-time. That's what I had in mind. Hey, I want to start working part-time. Believing that there's no time like the present, I had seized an opportunity to express my desire to work to my husband. But the next moment, there was a loud sound as my husband slammed the table. I found him standing there with a livid expression. I was so surprised that I shrunk back and was at a loss for words. You want to work? Does that mean my earnings aren't enough for you? Since my goal was to get a divorce, that statement was somewhat true. No, it's just that I'm afraid I'll lose touch with society if I only focus on raising our child. And I might end up teaching her outdated values if I don't keep learning from society myself. Are you trying to belittle my income with those words? No, I get it. You just don't want to do housework. Even if you do start working, I'll make sure you handle all the household chores. His misjudgment was truly off the mark, and it made me less willing to do housework. I finally lost my temper and blurted out, I'm tired of living with you. let's break up. He must not have seen it coming. My husband was gaping, his eyes and mouth wide open in shock. Do you realize what you're saying? Yes, I'm well aware that it means I'll be better off. I'll take our daughter with me. I can rely on my parents for a while, and I'll figure out the job situation. It was a bit embarrassing to admit that I would rely on my parents, but I figured they would forgive me once things had settled down and I was able to help them out again. Phew. It was in that moment that I realized just how abruptly a marriage could come to an end.
Wait, reconsider. I was wrong. Actually, I don't even know what I did wrong, so I need you to tell me. I'll change.
My husband's words, admitting he didn't even know what he'd done wrong, were refreshingly honest, and I found myself appreciating that. It was only natural he didn't know since our way of thinking was fundamentally different. It was much better than him pretending to understand and just apologizing. I sincerely expressed to him that I was tired from our differences and the issues I had with his behavior and that I couldn't envision a future where things would work out.
I truly didn't realize that I was making you suffer so much. I'm sorry.
I wanted to talk about it, but you always interrupt me, and we never have a proper discussion. I'm just tired.
I promise I won't do that anymore. Won't you give me another chance? It would hurt too much to be separated from our daughter, and from you.
My husband said, tears streaming down his face. This was the first time I had ever seen him cry. Despite everything, it was hard to see the man I loved, the man I had married, in tears. I knew how much he adored our daughter. So I laid down the law, saying, there's an old saying, even the patience of a saint has limits, but I'm no saint, of course I have a limit. We both gave ground. I abandoned my part-time job ambitions, and he agreed to rethink his attitude, which allowed us to back away from the brink of divorce. We've had close to 7 peaceful years since then. Well, there were occasional flashes of his overbearing husband routine, but I believe he managed it well in his own way, quickly apologizing for any slip-ups. So, I let those go. However, one day, it was decided that my husband would go on a 2-year business assignment alone. The idea of making our elementary school-aged child switch schools was too heartbreaking, so my husband chose to take the assignment alone. However, this decision would drastically alter the fate of our family. When he returned from his 2-year assignment as scheduled, he had become even more of a domineering husband. Living alone on assignment. Maybe it was the backlash of having to do everything for himself? Or perhaps his promotion, where he was ordering around subordinates, had somehow crept into his behavior at home? I didn't quite understand the change in his mindset, but it was clear that his time alone had fostered an even more self-centered and troublesome husband. To give a small example, after he came back, he frequently forgot to turn off the bathroom lights or left the tap not completely shut off. Of course, I scolded him for this. After all, the electricity and water bills are nothing to sneeze at. But then, he would retort, it's my money, so I can use it as I want. Besides, if you see the light on, why don't you just turn it off instead of nitpicking? Despite my telling him it's wrong to leave things on, he would become irrationally angry, saying, the one who notices should naturally turn it off. Criticizing me for this shows how petty you are. His reaction was simply ridiculous. Pigs might fly. Lastly, maybe because his place of assignment was close to his parents' house, he visited them frequently. Whenever there was a small incident, he would say, my mom is old, but she doesn't mess up like you do. For instance, if I had served deli food because I didn't have time after a neighborhood gathering, or if I served leftover ingredients from our child's picnic lunch, he would criticize me relentlessly. Our child happily eats the food, and it's not like I'm serving deli food every day. The picnic lunch ingredients were homemade. Sure, I occasionally take shortcuts, but what's wrong with relying on convenient options now and then? Running a household is hard work, you know? I'm raising a child, attending open school days, and going to PTA meetings. Seeing a guy who doesn't understand any of this, just complaining while eating more than his fair share, really makes my blood boil. I've been thinking, if you're so obsessed with homemade food, why don't you cook? I was running out of patience. I had no reason to put up with complaints from a man who hadn't set foot in the kitchen since we moved into this house. I remember thinking how true the someone's saying is, it is good to have a husband who is healthy and out of the house. The idea of divorce began to cross my mind again after a long time. Then one day, on my way to the grocery store, I missed a step on the stairs, fell, and had to be taken to the hospital in an ambulance. I fractured my ankle. Incredibly, it's going to take about 3 months to fully recover. The doctor, laughing lightly, suggested that if things progress well, I could recover sooner. However, I suspected that was just a tactic to cheer me up. At least, the pain was too much for me to feel optimistic about such a speedy recovery. If there's anything good about it, it was that it wasn't my dominant foot, but even so, it was inconvenient for everything I had to do. Being taken in an ambulance meant I had to ask my husband to pick me up, which made me feel a mixture of guilt and reluctance. When I thanked him for coming to the hospital, he, ever the charmer in public, said, "I was worried. Does it hurt?" in a gentle voice. If he could keep up this attitude while I'm injured, that would be a relief. My hopes were brutally shattered later. It happened when I returned home. "Where's dinner?" my husband asked, so I suggested, "It's hard to do the housework with this foot." "I'm sorry, but could you help with the housework until my foot gets better?" We could even share the work in the kitchen, each of us doing what we can. I thought that even my husband wouldn't say "I don't care, you do it" to the injured person right in front of him, but he retorted, "Huh, what are you talking about? Housework is what women do. Know your shame to ask your husband." With a self-satisfied expression, my husband raised his voice as if he were stating the obvious. "Even when your wife is injured, you're absolutely unsparing, I see." It was the moment I felt not just astonishment, but even contempt.
It seems we have another child in this house. My little brother, maybe?
The one who smirked and blurted out this while resting her cheek in her hand at the living room table, possibly in the middle of her homework, was our usually quiet daughter. My husband reflexively exclaimed, "Huh?
What are you talking about? You don't have a brother, do you?"
He asked our daughter.
"I do. A big little brother is right there."
My husband, who was darting his gaze around at the finger pointed at him, looked at me with an expression that seemed to say, "Me." His face was so silly that I was about to burst out laughing. "I said you are a child, a little brother, because your intelligence is lower than mine and you can't even make your own meals. I can make my own food, you know," our daughter chuckled mischievously.
"Wait. This is between your mother and me. It's not something for you to butt into. It's like an education for your mother." "Huh? What can a fool educate? There's nothing for mom to learn from someone who can't even bring their own water, let alone make a meal."
Our daughter had completely looked down on her father. Normally, I would reprimand her, saying, "Don't say things like that to your father." But well, my husband isn't impressive enough, so it can't be helped.
"First of all, I don't really think of you as a father, so don't act so high and mighty, okay? Huh? After all, it's always mom who comes to the parent-teacher conference, and mom who listens to my worries. Even when I was little, when I asked you to play, you were always busy with the horse racing broadcast. No, there were times when I played with you, right? Come on, remember." I remember being made to weed the garden. Dad was mostly resting. Is that play? If it was a date, I'd have dumped you. First of all, the condescending attitude of "I played with you" is annoying. Our junior high school daughter's sharp tongue, now a bit more precocious, was a clean hit on my husband. But there were times when we had family time. Do you mean when Dad was talking unilaterally? Don't you mean Dad's one-man show?
At our daughter's laughter, I couldn't help but burst out laughing, too. My husband's face was turning red.
"I've been loving you too all this time. You haven't done much, have you? If the person you say you love doesn't remember being loved, it's just self-satisfaction."
At our daughter's sharp logic, my husband finally fell silent. His figure seemed to shrink a bit.
"You've gone quiet. Does Dad have any more self-proclaimed good relationship episodes? I feel like I could refute any of them."
At our daughter's grin, my husband just teared up and said nothing. He doesn't do housework or child-rearing, doesn't play with our daughter, but calls himself a good dad, so it must have been quite a shock. But my daughter, still a child, has never acknowledged him as a good father. I can only conclude that his image of himself as a good father is just self-satisfaction, given what my daughter says.
"Hey, can I say something I've been thinking about for a while?"
Upon hearing my question, my daughter answers, "Sure. I think I have a pretty good idea of what you're going to say."
"Would it be okay if we got a divorce?" "As far as I'm concerned, there's no problem. I used to lock myself in my room right away because I found Dad's boasting at the dinner table so annoying. I've been living as if Dad wasn't there in the first place."
Her bombshell leaves my husband pale and nearly in tears.
But without paying any heed to that, my daughter says, I'm about to be in high school and I want to get a part-time job. I'll support you, Mom. Let's live together. Ah, how reliable of you. Thank you. Hold on a minute.
Our divorce discussion is cut off by my husband. However, my daughter ignores him and says, "Men who cling on are unattractive, you know? Okay, go pack your stuff." She even pushes him out towards the staircase to the second floor where our rooms are. To my husband, I say with a smile, "Consult with an attorney." Understanding that he had no grounds to resist, my husband, sounding like a minor character in a villain's role, spits out, "Don't come crying to me when you regret this." He then packs his stuff and leaves our house. For about 6 months after that, my husband resisted the divorce, saying things like, "I don't want a divorce," and "I want to see my daughter." But when my daughter made an outrageous proposal, "If you win at rock paper scissors, I'll consider it," my husband, not in his right mind, agreed and lost. And so, we are now officially divorced. Of course, my daughter came to live with me, and our house became ours in the property division, and we also received child support. The car, which was joint property, was old, and I didn't have a license, so I let him have it. From time to time, he sent me letters with photos of himself and the sky, along with poems like "I realized how important you were to me after I lost you," and "This is how I am now." My daughter had fun altering her father's photos with markers, in the same spirit as doodling on a picture of Xavier in her history textbook. He seemed to keep reaching out to us without remarrying, but it was amusing that his feelings didn't reach my daughter at all. After we finished receiving child support, my daughter and I moved, and we lost all contact with him. On the other hand, my daughter worked part-time as she said she would and graduated from high school, then went on to a fairly good university in the state. By the way, I didn't spend the living expenses my daughter gave me, and I passed them on to her as a dowry when she got married. Although I'm a mother with neither skills nor education, I believe that if I try hard with will and determination, I can manage somehow. My daughter's husband is a very gentle person, and my daughter is rather dominant, so I'm a little worried. The husband said, "I like being led around, so I guess it's okay." Well, they were blessed with 4 children, so I guess they're doing well. When my daughter got married, I lived alone for a while, but at my son-in-law's suggestion, I moved in with them. It's only been a few years. Moreover, my son-in-law even made the house barrier-free for me when I moved. I'm so grateful to such a kind son-in-law. The grandchildren are adorable, and I'm enjoying taking part in child rearing again after a long time. These days, I'm thinking of protecting this lively home together with my daughter and son-in-law.